A deadly crash on a rural Alabama road. A father killed, a 2-year-old girl killed, the mother in critical condition, and a question no one could answer. Where's the baby? That's when we learned the couple had a 1-year-old, and no one had seen him since September. This is Six on Your Side Investigates. Each week we take you inside cases, in the courtroom with original interviews, data, and records. No speculation. I'm your host, Jen Horton, investigative reporter with 20 years on the job, covering violent crime and corruption. This is a really difficult case. What you're going to hear will be challenging because it deals with child abuse and death. I want to give you that disclaimer before we begin because this may be triggering for some of you, and I want to offer you the opportunity to stop listening if this is not a good fit. One of the touchstones of this podcast, at least for me, is that we don't re-victimize those who have been impacted by crime, and we don't sensationalize the facts. But I also believe we should know what's going on in our communities and how the criminal justice system works, and this is a show that gives an opportunity to bring that to you in a way that honors the facts and the cases that are moving through it. And this hopefully will start a conversation that could potentially create solutions to avoid these outcomes. This is a case with layers of tragedy and unanswered questions. Let's get started. December 8th, 2024, Fayette County, Alabama. That's the morning a 2020 Toyota Tacoma left the roadway on County Road 73 in Fayette County, hit a tree. The driver, Stephen Collins, he and his 2-year-old daughter, Riley, were killed. She was not in a car seat. The children's mother, Wendy Bailey, critically injured, airlifted to UAB. According to the investigation, Stephen Collins was driving 92 miles per hour at the time of the crash. Investigators conducted a crash data retrieval, or CDR, on that truck. It confirmed the vehicle was being operated at aggressive paces when the crash occurred. 3 people were in the truck. 2 of them died. When family who lived out of state came in and learned about this crash, they asked law enforcement, "What about the baby?" "What baby?" they said. That's the first time investigators learned Stephen Collins and Wendy Bailey had a 1-year-old boy. His name was Caleb Rowan Collins, and no one knew where he was. We spoke to some of those family members. One said, quote, "Yes, we are worried," said Catherine Chaplin, Caleb's great aunt. "Supposedly the baby is at a friend's house. We don't know who, a family friend. That's all we know." Here's the early investigative timeline based on our reporting at WBRC. The wreck, December 8th. On December 11th, Caleb's grandfather, John Elton Bailey, who lived with the family, was arrested and charged with failure to report a missing child. On December 16th, the Fayette County Sheriff's Office confirmed its investigation into Caleb's disappearance. The next day, December 17th, the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency issued an emergency missing child alert, not an Amber Alert. That distinction is important. The last confirmed sighting of Caleb Collins was early September 2024. He had not been seen in more than 3 months. And here's where this case becomes very difficult to report and very difficult to hear. According to court records, Wendy Bailey told Fayette County investigators that her fiancé, Stephen Collins, says he was going to kill their son and sent her pictures of Caleb's bruised and bloodied body. Court records state that Bailey acknowledged that she failed to intervene on more than 2 occasions that Caleb was physically abused, including being bound with rope and physically assaulted. According to those same records, Collins sent Bailey pictures of their son hanging from a rope from a loft with blood on his body and lying on the floor with extreme bruising. The messages that followed read, quote, "He won't move," and "I'm so sorry." Collins then sent a message saying, "He's moving." Bailey responded, "He just looks wore out and tired and hurt, and hopefully that's all." Bailey's domestic violence and child abuse charges stem from incidents in July 2024. The corpse abuse charge allegedly occurred on September 29th, weeks after Caleb's last confirmed sighting on September 4th. According to court records, Bailey told investigators that upon Caleb's death, his body was placed in a bag and stored in an outside storage building before being disposed of at an unknown location. This information came out less than a month after the wreck. At this point, the child's mother, Wendy Bailey, is charged with domestic violence, corpse abuse, among other felony counts. After the wreck, investigators led multiple searches around the family's home in Winfield. They searched the surrounding area and followed leads, but it would be months before more information would be released. In April 2025, a grand jury indicted both Wendy Bailey and her father, John Elton Bailey. This means the grand jury found probable cause these crimes occurred, and the defendants can now stand trial. Wendy Bailey is indicted on aggravated child abuse, 4 counts of domestic violence, abuse of a corpse. She's also indicted on criminally negligent homicide for the death of her daughter for failure to ensure she was properly restrained in the car. John Bailey is indicted on 7 counts, aggravated child abuse, 4 counts of first-degree domestic abuse, and abuse of a corpse, and hindering prosecution, first degree. Following the indictment, Wendy and John Bailey pleaded not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect in the summer of 2025. Both remain in the Fayette County Jail. In May 2025, 5 months after Caleb was publicly reported missing, the Fayette County Sheriff's Office announced it found human remains they believed were Caleb Collins in a burn pile at the family's house. The remains were sent to forensics for official identification. The case continues to move slowly. A status hearing for John Bailey in November 2025 delayed at the defense's request. District Attorney Andy Hamlin told WBRC all of the forensic evidence was not back. I'm honored to introduce you to Taylor Pollock. She's a WBRC reporter. She's been our boots on the ground since we learned about this story. And Taylor, the big question everyone has when we talk about this story or when they read the story, how can something like this happen? Especially when you pull back and people didn't even know a baby was missing, a 1-year-old at that.
It's a very shocking story, certainly for Alabama. It's gotten a lot of attention in other states as well. There have been national child advocates that have gotten involved in this story, and it's a really sad story. Any story that involves a child being abused, losing their life, it's hard for people to hear, but the more that we peeled back the layers on this story, so to speak, I'm not going to say that anything we found out so far has in any way justified what we know through various records to have happened, but it does help to put a little bit into perspective how something like this may have been able to play out.
You found family members, you stayed in touch with family members, and through those conversations, can you give a little color as to maybe how something like this could happen based on those conversations?
So Caleb's uncle, his paternal uncle, was, I believe, the first family member that I made contact with. And he admitted to me up front that he and his brother had had some disagreements in the past, and he had not seen the family in a while prior to all of this happening. And then I also made contact with Caleb's maternal great aunt. And she also mentioned to me that the family was estranged. I know that Wendy Bailey was originally from Louisiana. And at one point, Stephen, I believe, was also living there. This family they weren't native to this area of Fayette County. They had moved there. They had moved there recently, from what I gather. And it didn't seem as though they were extremely involved in the community. They didn't have a lot of neighbors nearby. I've been to the house that they were in, that they were renting. There's really no other houses around. There's wooded areas, very large wooded areas nearby. So when you take all of these things into consideration, it is kind of somewhat understandable why it may not have been on anyone's radar.
You went over to Fayette to cover some of these vigils, and that's when you learned DHR had been involved to some degree at least.
Yes. And I think it's interesting to mention what I've learned from Caleb's maternal aunt. She claims that law enforcement wasn't even aware of Caleb's existence until her sister, that would be Caleb's grandmother, when she found out that her daughter had been in the wreck, drove from their home in Louisiana to Alabama. And when she made it to, I believe it was the hospital where her daughter was, began asking the question, well, I know my granddaughter is unfortunately dead, but where is my grandson? And according to Caleb's maternal great aunt, that is how it was discovered in the first place that Caleb was missing. When we did start to get little nuggets of information from law enforcement. They did confirm Aaliyah issued an emergency missing child alert. These vigils started happening because it really rocked this community. They couldn't understand or believe that something like this had happened. We actually heard from a preacher, and this corroborates a story that I also was told by Caleb's great aunt, that Caleb and his sister at one point had actually been taken by DHR from the home and placed into that pastor's home for, it seems like, a couple of days, but ultimately DHR removed them and put them back in the home. And if you ask Caleb's great aunt, she says that John Bailey, which is Caleb's maternal grandfather, was given custody of the children. He was their main legal guardian. DHR, it's very hard, as you know, to get anything from them, any sort of answers. It can be. So it is unclear why they were taken from the home and then essentially put back into the home with the same people, but what it sounds like just under different guardianship. And we may never get those answers.
Let's turn to the investigation. Running parallel to everything you've just discussed, they immediately started searching for the little boy. Give us some color of what those searches looked like when investigators were on the ground, what they were looking for, how they were going about things.
You had dogs roaming the area, sniffing the ground. There was caution tape up. That caution tape remained up for several days. And it was very extensive, and they went back to the home multiple times looking for Caleb. There was a shed not far from the main home, and it looked like they had turned it inside out.
We learned through court records some exchanges between Stephen Collins and Wendy Bailey, and that's arguably the most challenging part about this case, and that's involving what we shared with you earlier, involving the child's death. Do you feel like that was a turning point in this case? Did that answer a lot of questions for you? How did that information land with you?
I think that was a very somber turning point in this story. You want to be optimistic in this story that maybe Caleb is safe and sound with some unknown person. But I think this confirmed the worst fears of a lot of people, that he had allegedly been suffering this abuse. I believe in those court records, Wendy Bailey admitted to putting his body in a trash bag. And I think it absolutely was a turning point in the investigation, because I think along with or around the same time that those court records were made public, we also had from law enforcement them sharing that they did not believe that Caleb was alive at this point. When we interviewed the sheriff, and this was one of two times that I was actually able to interview him in person, they announced that they had remains that they had found at the property, and that an anthropologist, who was actually from Troy University, was able to determine that the remains that they found were human. But the sheriff did mention that they'd actually found those remains sometime before, and whenever he did talk to the media about this, it was shortly after the anthropologist was able to make that connection. So it sounds like when we were out at the house and they were out at the house, they had maybe gathered what they had suspected to be something of interest in this investigation, but they didn't want to jump the gun, so to speak, perhaps, and that's why we maybe didn't hear about it until so many months later.
Explain why it takes a while to get the results that you need to take a case with this weight behind it to trial.
So I talked with a forensics expert. He actually teaches at Jacksonville State University. And he told me that this is a very intricate process, and it can take months, maybe even a year. And that's if they're able to get DNA at all. He told me that you've got to consider the facts that we know from this case. Caleb was last seen in September. He wasn't discovered missing until December. We don't know how long any human remains out at this property may have been out there. They were found in a burn pile. So you've got to consider the condition that these human remains were probably in. You also, too, have to consider that Caleb was only a year old. And when you're a year old, your bones aren't fully formed, hardened, and that can make them even easier to disintegrate, especially when you consider the elements. You've got harsh Alabama heat. You've got cold, wet winters. Who knows what else these remains were subjected to. And he mentioned that, it could take a long time if anything is able to be extracted from these remains at all. I think he really did help to drive home the point of patience that the district attorney early on in this investigation had asked for from the public.
But what big questions do you still have lingering about this case?
I don't know that we'll ever learn why the alleged abuse happened. By all accounts, it doesn't seem as though Riley maybe suffered. It's certainly not to the extent that Caleb allegedly did. A lot of people wonder why the crash. I can't remember if we've talked about this before, but one of the family members has told me that she believes that the crash was intentional. She thinks that Stephen Collins intentionally wrecked that truck. Did that have anything to do with this case? There's a lot of questions that I'm sure a lot of people have, but will they ever get answered? And I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Well, Taylor, this is a tough one, but we appreciate you walking us through it. We appreciate all your hard work, because had you not just continued to pound the pavement, we wouldn't know half of what we know today. So thank you for your work on this.
Of course, there's a lot of answers. And this isn't just me. We've had so many people in this newsroom invested in this story and checking periodically for any updates. They have definitely helped in my coverage on this, and they have a lot of the same questions that a lot of people who are interested in this case have, and we're going to continue to work to get them.
Caleb Rowan Collins was 1 year old. He was last seen September 4th, 2024. His disappearance wasn't investigated until December of that year, after his family was involved in a deadly crash. Investigators believe they found his remains in a burn pile at the family's home in May 2025. His mother and grandfather have been indicted, and they have pleaded not guilty. This case is still pending. They're scheduled to go before a judge in September of 2026 for a plea docket, an opportunity to change that plea. We will be at that hearing, and we'll update you right here with any new evidence. Thanks for sticking with us through this difficult episode. I want to hear from you. We want to hear what your questions are, what cases you want to see here. Just email me directly, jennifer.horton@wbrc.com. Put podcast in the subject line. And if this kind of reporting matters to you, please go ahead and follow this podcast and subscribe. We don't want you to miss anything. We'll see you right back here next week. Bye for now.